People are starting to say hello. That's lovely. A lot of us know each other, and some of us are new faces, and that's all good. So I think we will go ahead and get started. So good afternoon, everybody. It is such a pleasure. I wish I could see all of you. Thank you so much for deciding to join us today. We are launching the very first virtual Disrupt HR Rochester event. So thanks for joining us. I am Leanne Reed. I'm CEO at Hubbub Solutions, and I will be facilitating our session today. Our original date for today was for our live event. For obvious reasons, we've pushed that off to November 2nd, but we really wanted to stay connected to the community and wanted to offer some opportunities to think about innovation and disruption. So we decided to launch a virtual inspiration series leading up to our event. So welcome to the very first one. So we're going to pop to the next slide quickly. Thank you, Kim. What is Disrupt HR Rochester? Some of you know as well, some of you do not, but Disrupt HR Rochester exists to foster greater purpose, linking people, work, and community. Our vision is a community where enlightened ideas create the norm, and our mission is to challenge conventional thinking and inspire positive change. So, positive disruption for individuals, organizations, and communities is the goal. As you know, nothing great happens without support and collaboration. So my very first thank you goes to the board of Disrupt HR Rock and the committee members. You guys are tireless and amazing and full of innovation. So thank you. Thank you for creating this in our own community. My second thank you is to our technology partner, Tech Rochester, without whom, frankly, we would not be here today. And our own tech guru, Miss Kim Gaylord, is working her magic behind the scenes today. So thank you, Kim, for that. The next big shout out is to our elite sponsor, Reward Gateway, and our community partners, United Way of Greater Rochester and RTS. A special thank you to our supporting sponsors, Wegmans, Brown & Brown. Next slide, please. There we go. Brown and ADP. And lastly, thanks to our promotional sponsors, the Greater Rochester Chamber of Rochester, Tech Rochester, ATD Rochester, and Elevate Rochester. Please check out their websites of all of our partners to see what great work they're doing in our community. There's a lot going on. Even though we're all a bit shut down, there's a lot of great work still going on. So here's the framework for today. We are, yeah, we'll just leave it there for now. And actually, Kim, if you wanted to just go back to the very first slide, that would be terrific. Thank you so much. Good. The framework for today is relatively simple. The first part of our time will be spent looking at the interview between Stephen Covey, we're so excited, and Bob Whipple. The second portion of our time will be a Q&A with Bob Whipple. So we request that you type in your questions into the Q&A box, not the chat box. We're not going to be monitoring that. So please put your questions in the Q&A box so that we can have a wonderful participative experience following the interview. So now for the main event. I'd like to introduce our very own Bob Whipple. He has been an amazing person in our own community, but not just our community, throughout the region. So Bob is the CEO of Leader Grow Inc., an organization dedicated to development of leaders. He speaks internationally on leadership and the development of trust. He has taught leadership and business at several regional colleges. As an executive coach, speaker, and business consultant, he works with individual clients and large organizations. Bob's ability to communicate pragmatic approaches to building trust has won him top rankings wherever he speaks. Bob is the author of 5 books on trust, more than 100 videos, and 700 articles on the topics of leadership and building trust. For his work, Bob has received many awards from local and international organizations, including 2 Lifetime Achievement Awards. So welcome, Bob, and thank you for being here.
Thanks, Leanne. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. I hope we get a lot of great questions at the end. The genesis of this idea was that I knew that Disrupt HR was hurting a bit because of the need to cancel the main event for this year. So I thought about the idea of chatting with Stephen Covey, who's a friend of mine, and you know, getting some information from him relative to what can organizations and leaders do in this COVID-19 situation that can further enhance trust. And Stephen came up with some really neat ideas, so I'm anxious to get to the tape.
Fantastic. And with that, we're going to go straight into the video interview. I'm going to turn off my video so that it is not distracting, and Kim will get us started.
Maybe a dozen years since we both write and speak in the area of mine. We've been friends for about maybe a dozen years since we both write and speak in the area of trust. We've gotten to know each other pretty well over the years and worked well together. So I've asked him to come today because I've got some information that I think he has to share that will be quite interesting to everyone. So Stephen is, I think, in my opinion, and a lot of other people believe too, that Stephen is the furthest point north in the in terms of fame and people know him and know the name. He's the son of Stephen R. Covey, who's the famous author of The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Unfortunately, Stephen died a few years ago. So, but he was a great man and raised a great child. So Stephen has written 2 books on trust. The first one is probably the more well-known, The Speed of Trust. I think that came out in 2008, was it? Or something like that?
Yeah, actually 2006, and then I just did an updated edition in 2018.
Oh, okay. And then he also wrote a really interesting book that I've enjoyed quite a bit called Smart Trust that kind of delves into the area of trust in a slightly different way. So he's really contributed a whole lot over the years to the trust community. And we both belong to an organization called Trust Across America, Trust Around the World. You may have heard of Barbara Kimmel. She runs an organization there, and there's a subset of that group called the Trust Alliance, and Stephen and I are both members of the Trust Alliance, and actually we're both Lifetime Achievement Award winners for top thought leaders in trust. So we belong to the same club, I guess. And we were having a Zoom meeting about a couple weeks ago, and Stephen was introducing some thoughts relative to trust in this environment of the COVID-19 disaster that's going on that I thought were quite interesting and that I had not thought of before. So I thought it'd be useful to have him kind of describe his thoughtware there. So Stephen, take it away.
All right. Well, wonderful. It's great to be with everybody at this virtual meeting for Rochester Disrupt HR. I'm delighted, and I appreciate my friend Bob. As he mentioned, we go back many years, and we're working in the same space. And they don't call him the trust ambassador for no reason. It's because he knows this topic in and out and is a real expert. So I'm honored to be here with him. And the thought I have as it relates to trust in our current environment is simply this: that I like the idea of a trust account that people have between each other. A balance of trust in the relationship. Even companies may have a trust account, a balance of trust with their team, with their employees, with their people. And just like a financial bank account, when you make a deposit, it goes up. We take a withdrawal, it goes down. You take too many withdrawals or too big a withdrawal, you're overdrawn. There's insufficient money in a financial bank account. There's insufficient trust in a trust account. So the idea of a trust account is very relevant for our times today, because the premise is this, is that if before this pandemic has hit us, if our starting point to begin with was that we had built a high trust team, a high trust culture, high trust relationships. In other words, if the trust account was high, as we have gone into the pandemic, it remains high. In fact, I would even argue it's even amplified. And as a starting point, it becomes even higher because of the circumstances around us. And I think it works the other direction as well. If the trust account or the balance of trust in the relationship and the culture was low to begin with, or even overdrawn, as you go into this new environment with all this disruption and this crisis and chaos and uncertainty, that it stays low. It starts at a low place and maybe even is amplified downward.
Yeah.
And so this principle of amplification in either direction is kind of a starting point. But Bob, as you know, as we talked about, that's not the ending point. That's just maybe a starting point of starting with a level of trust. Maybe it's if it was high before, it's going to be high going into this. If it was low before, it will be low going into it. Maybe even amplified in either direction as a starting point.
So that's something that leaders are going to have to work their way through, regardless of the circumstances. And there's a lot that leaders can do during the hiatus that affect that, right?
Right, and that's the opportunity. That's why I say it's the starting point, because how we navigate through this crisis, how we do what we do, can actually impact the level of trust. And we can, again, amplify it even higher and reverse the negative trend if the trust was low by our explicit, intentional efforts to build trust. And maybe the most significant thing that we can do during a time of crisis as leaders is to communicate, and communicate, much more than normal, and to be intentional about our communication, and to be open about it, to be transparent, to talk straight so that people know when we say something, we're telling the truth. They don't have to read things into it or kind of, cut down the spin. No, they know that we tell the truth. And the whole idea is that people may not always like what they hear, but they learn that they can trust what they hear because we're honest, we're authentic, we're straightforward. Yeah. And when you have that kind of communication, so a lot of communication, and then the quality of the communication is direct, it's open and transparent, and we're also kind of addressing the real issues. We're not skirting them or evading them. We're dealing with real things. That shows that you trust your people.
Yep.
And they're able to handle even the tough news. And
how you communicate will impact first of all, they'll see the effort. It takes effort to communicate. I used to, when I was in manufacturing, I always kind of observed an interesting phenomenon when things were kind of dicey and people were worried or people were upset about something, and there were rumors going around or maybe potential layoffs or, people were unsettled. I observed that the leaders tended to want to hide in their offices. They would go in and get on their computer and type away and try to shield themselves because they didn't want to have to answer questions out there that were tough to answer. And I always advocated exactly. I said, if things are dicey out on the shop floor, you need to at least double the amount of communication that you're doing. You need to resist the temptation to hide and get out there and interface with people. Tell the truth. Don't BS people. And I think that's the same situation that's going on here.
You're exactly right, Bob. It's the same situation especially because of what's happening and the uncertainty out there. If we don't communicate, if we stay in our office and hide because we don't have answers, people will bring their own meaning to it.
Yeah.
They'll project into it. They'll come up with their own interpretation of it. And they also will wonder, do they know what's going on? And if they feel like they don't know what's going on, that's not a good thing. Or they might feel like they do know what's going on and don't want to tell us.
Yeah.
That's not a good thing.
That's not a good thing for trust. No.
That's right. The more you can be open and transparent, saying, here's what we know, here's what we don't know, And that's, you're being vulnerable in doing that, but you're honest, you're authentic, you're real. And here's how we're going to try to learn about what we don't know and how we'll communicate it to you when we do know. It just shows that we're real. There's nothing to hide here. We're in this together. We're authentic about it. And you can trust us as the source to talk straight to you and to give you the news, both the good and the bad. And that's just a better place to be, because then you keep the currency of trust strong.
Yeah.
And that's where you can, if you go in high to begin with, you'll amplify it higher and higher. If you went in low, here maybe is an opportunity to say, look, we want to re-engage with our workforce. We're going to try harder. And we're going to, like you say, it's hard work to communicate.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to try to communicate, but it's not just that we're going to try to say things. We're going to try to be as open and as transparent and as authentic, as well as straightforward and honest as we can, so that that we can build an increased level of trust. And, you can't talk yourself out of a problem you behaved yourself into. So we've got low trust to begin with. The only way we're going to get it back is to behave our way back into trust. But we could do that by how we communicate. So, the answer is to communicate, but it's how we communicate that also matters.
Yeah.
That makes all the difference.
Yeah. I just really like that theory. You can really relate to it. I've been on some calls with various CEOs here in Rochester that I have great respect for. Lauren Dixon wrote an article in the Rochester Business Journal that came out last Friday that was just awesome about it. And she said, trust rules.
Absolutely.
And so I really appreciate your sharing those insights with us, Stephen. I know you're a busy guy and I don't want to hold you up, but I do appreciate you taking the time to chat with me about this, and we'll pass it on and have some interesting discussions about that, and I'll pass back what other people were saying. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Well, thank you, Bob. Maybe the only thing I would add is that, I love what Lauren wrote about trust rules, because it does. And I like to say that trust is the new currency of our world today. That was true before this pandemic. I think it's even more true during the pandemic, during a crisis, during disruption, to know where you can have trust and where you can have confidence, even if they don't have the answers yet, to know that you're going to hear it straight, where they're coming from. That is the ultimate currency. And for a leader, the foundation of that, the greatest asset is your credibility. The greatest currency is the trust that people have in you. And the greatest power that we have as leaders is our ability to extend that trust to others. And so what I would say for our leaders is that right now, especially, in addition to communicating well and frequently and openly and honestly, there's a great opportunity also to intentionally extend trust to our people. To declare that we trust them, to show that we trust them. So not just say it, but do it. Because right now there's a lot of remote work going on.
Yep.
And you could have remote work going on and not trust your people and just hover over them. Or you could say, now's the time to say, you know what? We can trust, and we can have clear expectations and accountability on what we're trying to do. And we can intentionally extend trust and tell your people that you trust them. And what you do right now during a time of crisis will again have that amplification factor as it comes back to you.
Yep.
It will be multiplied. So right now is a great opportunity to increase our ability to build trust with our teammates.
That's great. And I think that when we get back, everybody's talking about get back to normal. We're never going to get back to where we were. We're going to be in a different place. And that's going to be the ultimate leadership challenge when folks begin to get back to the workplace. It's our actions and how we handle that's going to affect that amplification as well, right?
Absolutely. I would just put it this way. How we do what we do makes all the difference, because trust is built through that consistent behavior. As you know, and you teach so well, Bob, in your work, and I do the same in mine, we have to behave our way into trust, just like you can behave your way out of it.
Yep.
But we can become deliberate about this and intentional. And that's the invitation I would give to all our leaders today, is that the stakes are higher and the opportunity is higher to have greater impact.
Yeah.
by being intentional and deliberate about building trust on purpose. Through your credibility, through your caring for people. Right now, caring is so important, and then you demonstrate that with this communication, the frequent communication, and the open, authentic, straightforward communication, and the extension of trust. And you can behave your way into greater trust, even coming out of a pandemic, maybe especially coming out of a difficult time like right now. So I think that is our opportunity. It's also our challenge, because none of this is easy.
Yep. Oh, that's great. Thank you so much for sharing that. I really appreciate it. I know there's a lot of people here in Rochester and probably other cities that'll appreciate it as well. So thanks very much for spending the time with me, Stephen, and we'll talk to you later.
You're welcome. It's always great to be with you, my friend, Bob.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Fantastic, Bob. I can't thank you enough for having such a lovely conversation with Stephen and pointing out some of the incredibly important pieces and opportunities that we have right now. Sometimes it doesn't feel like an opportunity when crisis is swirling around you, but as we all know, there's always an opportunity. I'm going to go to our questions because they're already rolling in.
Okay.
I'm going to start with the first one from Melanie. What is a good way for a leader to measure their trust account? How do you actually know if it's high or low? And what are some good indicators, especially now when everyone is working from home?
Well, there are a number of instruments that will measure trust. I have one that I use in my business. The Trust Across America organization has one called Tap Into Trust, which has a bunch of different variables and can measure rather quickly. We think of it as something very esoteric, like we all know what trust is. We know it when we see it, and yet when we go to try to define it, it's a little bit more elusive, and it's all around us all the time. So, but one myth is that it's impossible to measure it. I don't buy that. I think it's rather easy to measure it, and not only that, you can measure it and determine what areas are getting in the way. For example, most of the time when I work with organizations and there's a trust issue, the number one thing that jumps out as an issue area to work on is accountability. And we don't do that very well. So I don't know if I'm getting at your question, Melanie. You can try again, but did I answer the question, Leanne?
I think you did very well. Yeah.
Okay.
I'd like to further it a little bit, though. We talk about barometers and that sort of thing, and you're talking about there are some ways that we can actually measure trust. So accountability is one way. Stephen talked about transparency, also critically important, particularly at this point in time. Are there other specific qualities or areas that people can look to, not just from their leaders, but within themselves also, that would indicate strong trust?
Yes, I think Stephen gave a hint of that when he talked about the extending trust, because trust is always reciprocal. You give trust, you are a trustor and a trustee in every relationship. And so there's a level of trust, and it moves and it changes all the time. It's not one thing. We think of it as one thing. That's our, when we think, do I trust my son or, whatever, that is how we tend to gravitate toward the people part of it. But if you think about it, any product that you interface with, if you have a pill that you take in the morning, a vitamin pill, you're trusting that pill, because if you didn't trust not only the contents or what it is, the recipe, but also who put it together and who shipped it and all that stuff, we are forced. You walk into the bathroom and you turn the light on and the light goes on, and you don't think about it because it wasn't a failure. You step into your car and you turn on the ignition and there's a whole bunch of explosions under the hood, but you're not thinking about that. You're going to work, or maybe not these days, trying to go to the store. And you step on the brake and the car stops. And we don't think about it unless there's a failure. You drive over a bridge, you're not really worried about, well, there's some bridges I guess I worry about. But most of the time, we are By the time we get up and functioning in the morning, we've experienced trust in our lives several hundred times, and we never even are aware of it because there's no failure going on. But we live in a sea of trust. And what Stephen said about extending trust, if trust is reciprocal, the one thing that we can do is measure how much we're showing trust in other people. Because the best way to improve a relationship of trust is to extend more trust.
Which means listening, incorporating their ideas, empowering them to act independently, and then you have a whole host of other activities and actions that we can look to. But thank you, Bob, for that. I'm going to pop to the next question.
Okay.
It's a little bit of a long one, so hang in there. So working environments for teams are quite, I'm sorry, this is from Christine. Working environments for teams are quite diverse during this crisis. Some have children to care for, some have more than one person working from home. Some have dogs and cats running through getting crazy. That's my own editorial addition there. There are so many distractions and adversities that our employees are facing. So demonstrating empathy and acknowledging the realities our employees are facing is very hard for some of our managers. Can you speak to how often and what content is most meaningful for us to deliver and amplify trust during these times?
Yeah, and what methods are useful, because at least in this environment, if you have a Zoom meeting, you can pick up some of the body language anyway, and body language is so important to trust. Body language is really the way we communicate, much more than we realize. So it's around us all the time. So what's the essence of the questions here again?
Oh, sorry, I just popped it off of my screen, but really, how to do this, how to demonstrate empathy and connect with all of your employees for managers that frankly aren't very good at it.
Yeah, one of the key parts about leading, I think, is to know your people well enough to know what works for them. You don't treat everybody exactly the same way because everybody's needs are somewhat different. In following the rules, everybody has to follow the rules, of course. But the way we show empathy and the way we connect with people is an individual thing based on our knowledge of that person. So let me tell you a little story around that, because this will illustrate my point rather well. I was walking with my boss years ago on a manufacturing production line, and he pointed to an inspector sitting over in the corner who was kind of asleep at his station. He sleeping away, and he said to me, he said, "Bob, that guy is a loser." I said, "Yeah. We can't get him to do anything. He's absolutely you have to light a firecracker under him to get him to even speak. He's just deadwood." And so we're trying to get rid of him. And my boss leveled me. He said, "Bob," he said, "you're right. At Kodak, that guy is a nothing." But he said, "I'm the fire chief of the Irondequoit Fire Department. And that guy is a member of that fire department. And you should see him, that same guy, when he walks through the door of the fire department. He's on top of things. He does extra work. He's really good with people. He's so motivated and so turned on. He's just a joy to have as a fireman in that environment. So Bob," and this is where he really nailed. He pointed his finger at my nose and he says, "Bob, so tell me, who's the problem? Is it him or is it you?" And I learned a lesson that day. So what we need to do is find out what is it when people are acting out and people are struggling. What is getting in the way? Because 99% of the people will want to do that and will want to be engaged and will want to be good employees if they're treated the way that they want to be treated. And so if there's something wrong, you as a leader have to go and figure out, okay, what do I need to do? Where is the magic? There's a key. Each one of us has a key to our motivation, and it's not the same for everybody. So we have to, number one, I think, Chris, is one is to know your people and then provide them what it is that they're looking for. Cut them some slack, you know, obviously recognize that we're all human beings and we're all going through a not fun time, a really scary time.
Mhm.
And so, but know your people well enough to know how to approach them and how to show empathy, and where you can, use body language too.
Thank you. I'm going to flip that for a minute. Let's say that your boss has a very different value around trust than you do, and he or she is actually eroding trust within the workplace. Do you have suggestions for how an individual or a leader of a different division can actually change the trust levels within the organization?
Yeah, it's an interesting, very interesting problem, and it's very frequent. It comes up often. Because the people will say, gee, you know, Bob, I really buy into what all you're saying here, but, you know, the guy up that I'm reporting to, he's not going to hear it. He doesn't understand, and therefore this isn't going to go anywhere. Well, so the quote that I always give back, and this one is the famous quote, you say, never wrestle a pig. You get all muddy and the pig loves it. So what you need to do is you need to get enough purchasing power with a errant boss that doesn't really understand what's being left off the table. If you don't have trust, nothing works. I mean, it's like productivity is half of what it could be. And everybody's screaming for resources. We need more people. No, you need to get more out of what the people that you have. And so the idea is to get enough purchasing power with the boss to be able to, you know, you don't go in and say, stop being such a narcissist. You're an idiot. Because that's not going to get you anything but, crap. So what you need to do is try to understand what's going on in that person's mind. What's the objective? What he's trying to do, and suggest that wonder if there'd be an opportunity for us all. And now, instead of pointing the finger at him or her, say, could we grow? Could we be a better organized? Could we do better if we're better at leadership? And suggest that maybe we have a lunch and learn series or something like that, and get some books that, and by the way, boss, why don't you suggest the first book that we might use? Okay, so you kind of ease into it and use a little bit of peer pressure to try to be, and then at some point along the way, you have the opportunity, if you get enough stake, to be able to say, maybe sometimes we're operating at cross purposes to what our objectives are. And if we would learn to feed the trust vector a lot more, and show more empathy, and show more concern for our people, and demonstrate trust, lower the fear. That's a big, huge thing. It's my quote on that was, the absence of fear is the incubator of trust.
Absolutely.
So if we can suggest that we could do better by that, then, and get the boss to buy into it, then we can begin to educate through peer pressure and not have it be rejected.
I think often we may minimize the level of fear that our leader, boss, division director, whatever, is experiencing. And fear, we know, it immediately constricts our ability to be innovative, creative, and actually destroys trust. But if you've got someone that's behaving in those ways, chances are their fear factor is really high. So my struggle is always, how do you be honest, truthful, and have radical candor is a newer phrase, but not jeopardize relationships and actually make things worse. So thank you very much for pointing out that fear is often a big piece of all this. So
the one skill that I try to teach leaders is a skill that I call reinforcing candor. And that is to teach leaders that when someone says something that you don't think is right, you don't necessarily have to climb down their throats and give them this kind of body language, Instead, what you want to do is have this kind of body language. Say, wow, I didn't see it that way. Tell me more. What is it that's, we're looking at the same phenomenon and you're seeing it through a different lens. Let's talk about that. And make sure that when the person walks away from you, he or she says to himself, I'm glad I brought that up.
Nice. Yep. Opening the door. I'm going to pop to another one. This is
Okay.
from Fred. Bob, what are the key aspects of the new normal that you would like to see implemented as we come out of this quarantine?
It's interesting because nobody really has an accurate view of what the new normal is going to be. I do believe, certainly I'm experiencing it in my business, that the ability to communicate like we are today and the ability to call up Stephen and just have a chat and just record it took 10 minutes to do. And and people are willing to do that. So I think we're going to see this kind of forum being used in creative ways to help people grow and to help people bond. I mean, I've had so many Zooms over the past week where I would not have people I haven't seen in 10 years. I just had last night, we had a wonderful Zoom meeting, and our family get, all over the country, but getting together and being able to enjoy each other's company. So I think that is definitely part of the new normal, that we'll be, because now we're forced to, and I had to go and learn how to do this stuff, but now I'm talking with people that want me to come and do something in Mexico, and talking to people about doing something in California that I wouldn't necessarily be doing if I had to travel to go to those places. So I believe that the world is becoming a smaller place.
Absolutely. Here's another question. People are going to be in different places when it's time to return to the office. Some are going to be very anxious to return, and others may be hesitant. We're learning great things about what people's capacities are in this space, right? So how does a leader ensure they are meeting each person where they're at and helping all employees trust the return process?
That's an excellent one, and it has to do with the speed with which we go back to work. There's always pressure to go back to work sooner than some people think we should, and that's not a healthy thing. They're playing Russian roulette. They're rolling the dice and hoping that everything will be all right, which I don't agree with, and I don't think that's a smart way to run things. On the other hand, you can't shut it down forever, and we'll probably, until there's a vaccine or some medical proven method to deal with it, we'll always be in somewhat, I don't think we'll ever get back to being comfortable shaking hands, for example, unless we've got gloves on. Just isn't going to happen in my life, I don't think. And I don't like bumping elbows. I think that's kind of an awkward thing to do. So it's the new normal is going to be, and what I think that leaders need to anticipate showing a lot of patience and a lot of interfacing with people. Don't hide in the office. Be out there and let people and share what you're thinking, and let them share what they're thinking is the only way to get them to be comfortable over time. Some people will adapt pretty easily and just be loosey-goosey about it. Other people will be much more concerned about the impact. The impact is huge. Somebody dies, that's a huge impact. So it'll be a mishmash of things, and it's up to leaders to be the glue and to be out there and lubricate the situation so that we can flow and we can work together and be a little patient if things aren't getting done at the pace that they could be done. It won't be optimal, but the more trust we can build, the more productive the organization will be, and creative too.
So from a leadership standpoint, part of the process is understanding it is exactly that, a process. And it is organic in nature. We don't have all the rules for it yet, but the leader's job is to set some parameters so that people's anxiety can decrease a bit, so that they know how they're going to be operating, at least initially, but that frankly, change is change, and change is going to keep coming to us. So how do we manage the anxiety, have enough information so that we can move forward
Yeah.
but still be individuals within the process. And I'm going to jump on
Precisely.
the next question.
Well, just
Go right ahead.
one concept in that, the idea that focusing on learning, focusing on,
Mhm.
okay, we need to be adaptive and creative, and we need to be even more learning organization. So because things aren't going to be optimal, and so therefore think of it as every time there's a glitch or every time there's a situation, it's a learning opportunity, not a catastrophe.
I like that. So this is from Jody. What do you recommend employees do when they're not getting enough information or any information at all from their leaders and they desire it?
That's a very good question, Jody. If you as an employee would initiate a bunch of conversations, then you might get to be a pest. The boss, maybe if the boss isn't interested in communicating at a great degree, and you're asking a bunch of questions, you'll cross a line into which you're doing yourself more damage than not. There isn't, having conversations with your peers and inviting the boss to participate is a
Okay.
possible viable path. So that if the boss is interested, you can initiate some things, so maybe little discussion groups about, or maybe planning on some things that need to, the process really well, and you're thinking about, well, how are we going to get this packaging line up and running? And we've got the whole crew. We're going to have a little Zoom meeting together. Would you like to join us for that and share your vision for that? And so that you start getting mutual problem solving and mutual respect, and that allows things to maybe soften.
Awesome. And you make sort of an interesting point that you made earlier. It's going to be very important for us not to vilify our leaders, vilify our employees, or vilify our colleagues, right? We're all going to be responding to this differently, which kind of leads nicely into the next question from Karen, which says, what recommendations do you have in consideration of building trust in cross-cultural environments?
So the one thing to recognize, and I was having a discussion with someone this morning on this very point, that body language is very cultural specific. So one of the mistakes that we make is if we try to interpret if there's a person from Saudi Arabia on our crew, and we're seeing some body language and we assume that he's annoyed, it may not be that he's annoyed. It may be a different signal that he's sending. And so we have to recognize that depending on where we were brought up, where we came from, and the norms of that society, we can be very different in terms of proximity. How close we stand, for example, is a big difference. So culture comes into it through the norms and habits, and it's not just body language, it's also customs, it's also just the thinking process. How do we process things if we're from Europe as opposed to from South America? It's different. People process things different, and it makes life very interesting, but it also, we have to be careful about the assumptions that we're making about people, because they may not be correct. And the only device that you can use there is to be inquisitive and be, when something doesn't seem to track, that you get a sort of a puzzled look, then you have to go and say gently, you have to say, wow, maybe I wasn't being clear there. Can you help me understand how you heard it?
So asking, clarifying, inviting a conversation, but acknowledging you don't have all the answers necessarily, or you don't fully understand what the impact is right now.
Yeah, and recognize, I think one of the things is few people are willing to admit that they have biases, unconscious biases. You're not even aware of the biases that you have. And I think that that's a dangerous thing. I think we all need to say, yes, I'm definitely subject to biases, and therefore I need to be on guard about that all the time, because I may not even realize how I'm coming across I may be dissing somebody and not even realize it.
Thank you for that. Here's an interesting question from Heidi. It can be difficult to build trust when either you don't know the answers to the questions people are asking, or perhaps you can't share the answers due to confidentiality.
Yeah.
What are some strategies for building trust in these circumstances?
Yeah, that's very good. And it does go back to a body language type of situation as being very important on how you handle that. When you are asked a question that you don't know the answer to, that's a little easier. You just simply say, I'm sorry, but I don't know the answer to that, or I can't, I just don't know. I'll have to get back to you. And if you do that sincerely, the word that Stephen keeps using is authentic. You know, you're not playing a game. We're not playing games with people. We're being the real me. And so being authentic as you feed back the fact that I don't know. But when you do know and you are told to not say, you know, it's not something that we can divulge at this time. That's something where people will immediately read your body. If you say, well, I don't know, BS. That's much better to say, that is something that is being considered, that is something that is being talked about, and I am not privy, I'm not allowed to be able to share those conversations yet, but I promise you that as soon as we are able to share them, you will hear it, and you will hear it from me, and I will tell you the truth. That is the truth, and I'm being authentic when I say that. And if that's really the case, then they will pick that up through my body language, that I'm just enjoined. I cannot talk about that yet. The other half of that equation, Leanne, is, or Heidi answers, right?
Yes.
The other half of this one is to make sure that when people are asking embarrassing questions, you are being as forthright to hear what's going on in between the lines. They will ask things and they're really trying to get at something else. So you really need to be a master at being able to interpret what the real concern is here and make sure you're accurate about that, because otherwise you may give a flip answer. Oh, I don't know, you know, and they weren't really interested in hearing that at the time. So it's all about being sensitive to where people are and meeting them at their level. Okay.
And one last question. We're not going to have time to do all of our questions, but this is a really important one, I believe. When trust has been broken on either side, what can you do to regain it?
Great question. So what the first thing to do when there's been a breach of trust is recognize that probably both parties feel not so good about it, although there may be some information that's missing. So the first thing to do is not procrastinate. If you have a lifelong friend that you have very high trust in, or a mate or something like that, and something's happened that's just not like that person, don't procrastinate and expect it to go away. It's a dead fish and it will smell worse tomorrow than it smells today. So what you need to do is approach the other person in a mature way and remind them, say, you know, I've always trusted you and I've felt we've had a very strong relationship, but something happened here over the past few days I'm not feeling that good about it. Now, how about you? How do you feel? And if you can get some discussion going in a mature way, you're not being immature about this. You're really saying, I sincerely value our relationship, and something has apparently damaged it, and I don't want to be in a situation where that's the case. I really value our relationship and would like to repair it. If you look at it in that way, and if the other person says, yeah, I would like that too, now you've got a situation which is just marriage counseling 101. The idea is, okay, what happened? And unscramble it and find out what happened, find out what would have to change in the future so that we don't go backwards. And in a fair percentage of the cases, you can actually end up in a stronger trust position than before the breach happened. Not always, There are situations where you have to look at it and say, this relationship is over. And sometimes that'll be the case. But most of the time, I'd say 2/3 or 3/4 of the time, it's a repairable situation. If there was real trust there to begin with, and you handle it well, you can get back to better than it was before.
Mm-hmm. So a key element of that is being open and understanding that there may be something that you need to be doing differently, as well as the other person.
Exactly.
Right?
Try to pin that down. What would have to happen in order for us to be better than we were before?
Exactly.
And if you identify that, then you go and do it.
Right. Especially as we move forward and we're all communicating on multiple levels and ways that we aren't used to. Some of us are more comfortable with some of these modalities than others. I have people that say, I used to hate the telephone. Now I hate Zoom. So guess what? You're going to have to figure this out. So in order to stay connected, we have to become comfortable with different forms of communication. And always, it's very difficult to step in when things have been broken. But if we don't, there is zero chance of it getting better. So
right.
Thank you, Bob. This has been
awesome. You're welcome. It's been, I knew it would be fun, and it has been.
It goes so quickly, as we all know. I did want to remind people that to save a date for November 2nd for our live event. We're very excited about that. It will be happening at the Harrow East Ballroom at 5 o'clock. Also, would love to stay connected with you through Disrupt HR Rock. And here is the LinkedIn information and the Facebook information, and also an email for you if you'd like to connect that way. The last piece I'd like to remind you about is we will get the word out as soon as possible when our next virtual inspiration event is going to be. Until then, go forth and disrupt. Have a great afternoon, everybody.